Crimelight podcast contains subject matter that depicts violence, adult language, and may be sensitive to some listeners.
Interviews are the words of those speaking and may be speculative and not 100% factual.
Listener discretion is advised. I'm Lauren, your host.
And I'm Jasmine, your co-host. Together, we are Crimelight Podcast. We work to shine a light on missing persons and unsolved murders.
To help shine our light brighter, please subscribe in all major platforms: Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Google Podcast, and more. The case that you're about to hear today is definitely an emotional one, and one that will take you for a jump down the rabbit hole as we did, I'm sure. Her page on Facebook is extremely public. There's a lot to go into, but when you look up the news stories, there's just not a lot of information. So we were really happy to speak with Deborah Smith for this episode, which is Larissa's aunt, and she was able to give us some information that we had looked up, we had found, she was able to confirm. And you're going to hear some pretty shocking news on this episode as that conversation unfolds. So definitely stick around. But before we get into the case, I do want to give you just some information about her disappearance. And this is going to be read just directly off the Charlie Project. We will provide that link there in the show notes. So Sam was last seen in the 800 block of South Mount Street in Indianapolis, Indiana on June 21st, 2015. She had finished her shift at work and stopped at her uncle's house for drinks afterwards. At 4:30 a.m., she left and has never been heard from again. She was supposed to pick up her son the next day, but never showed up. She's described as a devoted parent, and it would be uncharacteristic of her to abandon her son. The police found Sam's car, a gold 2006 Dodge Stratus, backed into the driveway of an abandoned home in the 2700 block of Lyons Avenue in the Mars Hill area. The window was down, the keys were in the ignition, and one of the vehicle's front tires was flat. Sam's cell phone, shoes, purse, and some money were inside, but there were no signs of her at the scene. So that's just a little snippet from that website. And again, we'll put that link in the show notes. But Larissa is described as being 5'7", 135 pounds. She has many distinctive tattoos, so we definitely ask that you check those out by going to the link. And so this case is one that, I came across working another case and just really dug into it. And I think as you guys dig into it and hear this story, you'll probably jump down the rabbit hole yourself and look up some of the information we provided. But before we actually get into the phone call, I am going to play a few clips just so you can get to know a little bit of, who Larissa was just through her music and interactions with her son.
Clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it's in your face, will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, jump up and down. If you're happy and you know it, jump up and down. If you're happy and you...
Marcus is going to do the ice bucket challenge for ALS. Do you want to nominate anyone, Marcus?
I'm an audio like you, and I'm just gonna put on me, okay.
One ice bucket challenge, here we go.
Okay.
Down here.
Okay, so we were lucky enough to get into contact with Deborah, which is Larissa's aunt. She actually is the one that is taking care of Marcus, her son, currently. So we do have her on the line here, as well as Jasmine. So we'll take a quick moment and let everybody say hello.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
All right. So we kind of just want to get right into it. I know the listeners were able to hear the, pre-case setup, but we want to hear it from someone who definitely knew her best. So if you can just take us back to the beginning, kind of start off with who Larissa was as a person, your relationship with her, and then just what led into where we are today.
I am Larissa's aunt. She was a very bright and bubbly young girl. She was always happy, easygoing. She got pregnant at a young age and she had Marcus, and he was the light of her life. And her and Devin were off and on the whole time of Marcus's younger years. And Larissa was very into music. She loved to sing. She went and tried out for America's Got Talent the prior year in 2014, 2014. And then in 2015, she was getting ready to go try out for
American Idol, right?
American Idol. I couldn't think of the name of it.
Yeah, no, you're fine. Yeah. No, I remembered watching her practice on videos and stuff. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Her and Marcus always made videos together. You can find many of those videos still on Facebook and on YouTube. I try and keep her name out there. But then it was the Father's Day weekend, and I know I had worked a double. And when I got off work on the 21st, we had found out that she never made it home from work on that evening. I know my mother had Marcus, and Larissa had gone to work, and then she was saying she was going to go to her uncle's house to play guitar and sing some music with him afterwards. And she just never came home that next day.
And so going back to that night, so she had been at work, and we've talked to people that worked there with her. They had said, she'd had a few drinks that night. Nothing seemed too out of the ordinary. But what did seem out of the ordinary was the comment that they had made that her uncle actually would frequent this gentleman's club that she was working at. And I believe you have some information on that, and kind of if you could take them back to kind of where this relationship with the uncle began, just because some people that are listening may have never heard of a Larissa story. But if you could kind of set up, the disconnect in her childhood and when he came into her life and how that all happened, before we kind of talk more about the disappearance, so they can kind of get an idea of who this person was.
Yes. When Larissa was a year old, her father, Robert Wagner, had killed himself when she was a year old. He committed suicide, and her mother became disconnected with his side of the family. There was some stuff that went on that I didn't know about because I was younger then. And they kept Larissa out of that side of the family's life. Well, in 2013, Larissa found Rusty on Facebook, and she was questioning about her father's side of the family, and so she wanted to meet up with him. I was unsure about it because I didn't know that side of her family at all either. And so I asked her to have him meet her at my house. So they just met in 2013. They seemed to hit it off because it was her dad's side, and she'd always wondered about who her dad was. She did go on vacation with Rusty to Kings Island with he and his family and all of his kids. And then it was after that, probably about a year later in 2014, it seemed like he started becoming infatuated with her. Yes, she mentioned he did go to the Classy Chassy and he watched her dance. And that can be verified with the people at Classy Chassy. It was just very odd. And she was friends with his kids. His son's name was Chad Wagner, and Chad and his dad Rusty would always fight. And the night that she went missing, she had messaged Chad and tried to get in touch with him because they were fighting, and she wanted to try and have them make up. And I don't know what happened after that, though.
Interesting. So do you think, did Larissa ever kind of elaborate on him coming to the club and her feelings on that? Or did she ever say anything to you? Or was that information that you just found out later that he was going to the club?
She had mentioned it after he started going there. She thought it was kind of odd of her uncle to go and watch her dance.
Agreed.
It freaked
Very.
her out. Yes.
Okay, so she did express that there was concern. So she,
Yes.
okay. So which, I mean, and some people may say, well, then why would you go into that situation if you were uncomfortable? But I also want to, give the give and take that, this is a girl that didn't grow up with her dad. There was some
Right.
disconnects to her childhood, and trying to understand who your father is and who you are. And being that, they were separated for so long, I wonder if maybe in her mind or in his mind, he was able to justify like, well, you're my niece, but we didn't grow up around each other. So it's kind of one of those things where maybe it's not so weird. But when you really look at it, it's extremely disturbing to know that a biological uncle is, in a gentleman's club watching
Yes.
his niece perform. I mean, that is alarming. And that is one thing that when we, we're looking at this case. And like I said, I got into this case when I was working the Angie Barlow case because she was also a dancer in the Indianapolis area that had came up missing. She was missing for 8 months prior to being found. But there were so many connections between her and other girls that they were trying to kind of link it all together. Like, it's so strange that these dancers, but I kind of want to go back to that night. So the more we look into it, and IMPD has confirmed with me, there is no connection to Larissa and
Right.
any of the other girls in Indianapolis, not just Angie, but there is no known connection that she has been pulled into anything that any of the other girls were involved with that were also in the same line of work. But so that evening, she went over to her uncle's house. And when I was investigating it, and a big thing that came up was that, her Facebook was very public. She actually had two. She had the Larissa Sam Facebook, and she also had one that was like the Rissa Dancer.
Rissa Dancer, yes.
Yes, Facebook, where she would interact with customers and let them know when she was working. It was kind of like her way of advertising. And, and many dancers have regulars. So it was her way of kind of letting them know, hey, I'm coming into work tonight. That way, if you want to come in and see me, which a lot of people would say is good because it's a form of social media. You're not directly in contact. They're not calling you. They're not texting you. But at the same time, it created a lot of worry because almost anybody could have known her every move at any moment. If she was going to work, if she was going to be there, she was kind of setting that up for so many people to know, her uncle included. So I had found, through looking through that, that night that she was at Rusty's house, she had made a message on Facebook that went out. Her very last status said she was looking for a texting buddy, which if you go back on her page, you will notice she would post that often, but it would typically be when her son was at school, she was bored during the day, wasn't really going to be going anywhere and getting busy. Maybe Marcus was getting out of school soon, but just kind of bored and something to kill time in between that time. But
Yes.
when I look at her page, I never see that in the late evening, but I certainly never saw it overnight in those hours. So that struck me as strange because from Rusty's point of view and his side of the story was that she came over, they played guitar, he fell asleep, or they had some moonshine, hung out a bit, played guitar. But he says that she fell asleep. And then he also says she left at 4:30 in the morning, which is interesting. So before we dig into all of those details, if you could kind of tell everybody, we've talked before a little bit about it, but if you can kind of catch everybody up to when we find out Larissa's missing. I know her mom got on Facebook and started making statuses and tagging people that she saw interacted with Larissa saying, have you seen her? She never came home. But from that point on, what was the events that unfolded from that day? I mean, because it's Father's Day weekend, like you said. So it's like 4:30 in the morning. But at 5:30, there's actually surveillance video of a neighbor across the street. And you can find that if you look up her case. It is on news sources, and we will attach one in the show notes. But where, this vehicle is backed into this abandoned home across the street, keys left in the ignition, there's a shoe, her purse is still there with contents strewn about, but the money she made the night before is still in this car. And it wasn't a small amount of money. It was a decent amount of money, enough that somebody wouldn't leave there. And the SIM card was removed from her phone that was also left in the car. So it was all a very strange setup. And there's actually a male seen walking away from this vehicle. But no Larissa. Larissa is never seen in this vehicle. But the time frame from when Larissa is said to have left her uncle to when this video is actually taken is only, I believe, roughly like a 30-minute period. We'll definitely clarify that in the show notes. But so once you started to find out she was missing, now all this information I just said is coming back to you. So from your point of view and how you remember it, if you could kind of just explain where it all began as far as a missing persons report and we're looking for Larissa.
Yes, I remember I had just worked a 16-hour shift, so I got off work that morning at 6 a.m. and I started getting phone calls from my family telling me what all was going on. But I know that, yes, Rusty conflicted in his stories. First, he said she was asleep. Then he knew the exact time she left. So it just kind of conflicted. When they did find her car, it was the lady across the street who had the surveillance camera. She had gone over to the car since it was an abandoned house and looked inside the car, and she said she saw a cell phone. So she picked up the cell phone and just hit redial, and it called Rusty. So Rusty was actually the first one who knew where the car was. And then he called our family, and then her ex-husband was the first one to the scene of the car. And he looked in it before police even got there. And he is the one that removed the money from the car. There was $400 in the glove box, I believe. Her cell phone was still in the car. And keys were in the ignition. Her purse contents were strung across the back of the seat. The driver's side front tire was it was
Completely
flat.
flat, right? Yeah.
Yes, they said it was flat. And but it was backed into an abandoned house. And first off, if anybody knew Larissa, the girl could not back a car in to save her life.
I
She
know. I remember her mom telling me that when we talked a couple years ago, and she said that was actually one of the things that first struck her before they
right.
actually knew about the surveillance video, and were able to see that there was actually a male. I mean, it's assumed to be a male. It's a figure. It's IMPD has assumed it to be a male. We don't really
Right.
have any characteristics or anything to go on because it is a very fuzzy and low grade quality video. But
Yes.
we can say that Larissa was never seen on that video. And like her mom and you're saying, she couldn't, if her life depended on it, she couldn't back that car in. She just was one of those that you see a parking space, you're pulling in forward and her mom even laughed and said, and when she would back out of a parking space, it was almost, laughable. She had never been in a car accident, just one of those little bumper to bumper things, backing out of a car space. So the theme I got was that she wasn't a super comfortable driver, but if she were, if she did have a flat, let's say she were the one driving that car and had a flat, and wanted to just pull it over into a house to go look for help or make a call or whatever.
It would have been forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, that wouldn't make sense that she was in it and left the car on her own accord, being her phone was left. And the one thing that was interesting was the SIM card was removed from that phone. So someone obviously believed by taking that piece out that they were going to be able to hide some information.
Yes.
And there was obviously a motive for taking that card out. So yeah, so go ahead. I was just thinking how her mom said the same thing about the driveway.
Yes. And then I know the police told her mom that she couldn't report her missing until it had been 24 hours. So it wasn't until the next day that they let us turn in all her information to the police. Until then, they just considered it an abandoned car. So I feel like the police didn't help at first. They just kind of dropped the ball.
Well, and just so our listeners know, that's a myth. The 24 hours is actually a myth, and it's very unfortunate how many families we speak to that will tell us that they were told that, well, it's an adult. They can go off on their own. You should wait. There's some major cases that parents have been told that. Kanika Jenkins in Chicago, who was the young teen who ended up dead in a freezer, had wandered off. She was, slightly, intoxicated, but her mother was told the same thing. And, That's the crazy part, is that those first 28 to 48 hours, excuse me, I have a tickle, are extremely imperative because evidence and things can be lost. And it's unfortunate that they were told that. I mean, with the Angie Barlow case, I mean, they automatically thought that was the case. They kind of always heard that. But when they called IMPD, they said, no, that's a myth. You can come down now, which is interesting because it's the same department that's handling this case. So
Exactly. Well,
so
and
it's
then
very
the problem
interesting.
the problem we also had at first is they kept sending us back and forth between Johnson County and Marion County because Larissa lived in Johnson County. However, she was found missing in Marion County. So they were confused on who had jurisdiction over the case.
Right. Which causes problems because then you have reports sitting on desks and nothing's happening. So we're at the point where now we're able to go in and we're able to make that missing persons report. What was the take from Rusty? Did anyone go from the family and speak to him afterwards? Or, did the police talk to him? Or what do you know to be true as far as, those next couple of days and the interaction with him?
The next couple of days, I never really talked to him. I know there was, he talked to Larissa's mother, Rebecca, a few times, and talked to my mother, Joyce Penn. I do know they did not search his house. And I know that they searched her car, but they couldn't find any traces of anything inside the car. And then her uncle, Rusty, he left town like 3 days after she went missing. And he wrecked his Prius up in Michigan in a head-on collision with a semi-truck, which he was a semi-truck driver. And there is pictures of his car on the internet that you can see, and it looks like nobody should have survived that crash. However, he only got out with just a shoulder injury. And the FBI now look back and say that they feel that that was his first attempt at suicide.
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to clarify because I had mentioned that on Crimelight podcast. So I've talked to some investigators, some, different detectives, and while they're not, clearly I'm not on the same level of, an authority to get the same intel and information they have been willing to confirm certain information. So I mean, I know a lot of us have seen, Jasmine was saying the other day, because she was catching up on the case and looking up information, and she goes, it almost reminds me of Sons of Anarchy, kind of a Jax Teller kind of thing, where he was going to put himself in the line of this semi. And as a semi truck driver, knowing, if you're in a vehicle of that size, the odds of coming out of that, I mean, that was a miracle. The fact that he even survived. But I do agree with you. I feel like that was a blatant suicide attempt. And just to clarify on that, when he got in that accident, he was traveling up to Michigan. When he went to Michigan, but this accident was on the way back, correct?
It was on the way there, I believe.
It was on the way there? Okay. So that was the one thing I needed clarified on. So I know a lot of people have speculated, and I do want to say again, just for all legal purposes, that Rusty is a suspect in this case. However, he committed suicide. However, he is innocent until proven guilty. We are not saying that he is guilty. This is, there are other theories and ideas that we'll discuss here shortly, but he did ultimately, make this trip 3 days afterwards, which if this is someone you've reconnected with, she's been made missing. She was actually at your house last. Just emotionally on a human level, it seems extremely strange that you would leave town, because you would think you'd be out helping looking for your niece. There'd be concern. You wouldn't want to leave. So what was his reasoning for leaving town that you know to be true?
His reasoning for leaving town is he had just been married recently, and he was going up to bring his new wife, Laura, down to live with him in Indiana. So I have heard that he and his son, Chad, went to Michigan to help her move. However, later we have found out that Chad did not go with them, and he does not have an alibi in the state either.
which is extremely interesting. And I know you had mentioned before, if you feel like you can elaborate on that, but I know you said you've talked to Rusty's ex-wife. So what was her take on that? And is that how you were able to clarify that he was not with
Yes.
Rusty? Okay.
Yes, I spoke with Laura, and she told me that Chad was not with them. He did not help her move. She doesn't know what he was doing, but she also sent me a letter a few years back, and she had told me she was very sorry for everything that went on, that she wished she could provide closure for our family, and that she hopes her husband had nothing to do with it, but she actually feels that he did.
Which is interesting because that's coming from his own wife.
Yes.
So, I mean, if that's not telling about a person and their character, I don't know what is. Now, I do want to bring up something else just because whenever I dig into a case, I dig into everybody. And public records are my best friend. When I was looking into Rusty Wagner, which his real name is actually John, and it is public record on mycase.gov in Indiana, but he was actually convicted in 1989 of deviant sex acts and rape.
Yes.
Did you know that previously, or was that something that came out later, or was that discussed amongst the family, the details? You know, I know
We
to
did
be
not
convicted.
know.
Yeah,
We didn't know until after.
Okay. So after Larissa came up missing, now we're finding out that this man definitely has a past that is not painting a picture that's looking well for the fact that his niece was at his house last and now she's vanished. I mean, completely vanished. And over the course of the past 5 years, I know there's been many of different theories. So I do want to talk about a few of those. I know people have said that there's the idea that she's been sex trafficked and that's big in that area. And the area that she was actually in is called Mars Hill, which I'm familiar with. It is an area that has been ravaged by drug use, specifically methamphetamine. And it can be a dangerous area, especially when you have people that are addicted to such a mind-altering substance. So it can be a dangerous area for sure. But I do want to know, I want to hear kind of your feelings on it. And I can't sympathize anymore with her mother. I know that any mother's going to want to hold on to all hope. And I don't want to say that that's not what, none of us know. And the unfortunate part is that the one person that could answer a lot of questions about that evening is no longer on this earth to discuss this any longer. But as far as, what IMPD's told me, and you had elaborated that the FBI, they do not feel that this is a sex trafficking case, though. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so they've expressed
the reason the FBI actually got involved is because at first somebody was trying to extort money from our family, and due to that reason they got involved. We had people contacting us saying they knew where she was, and if we paid so much money they would turn her over.
Which is so unfortunate.
However,
it happens with so many families.
And then they got involved, and there was two main suspects at first, and one was Rusty and the other was her ex-husband, which was unfortunate because he's a good person, and he and I actually share joint custody with Marcus now, and he actually lives full-time with his father. We have come to grow closer over these past few years.
And that's great. I mean, because you are essentially his co-parent now at this point. I mean, Marcus has always known you, but I mean, Marcus was quite young when this happened. So if you want to tell us a little about how old was Marcus when Larissa went missing, and how old is he now?
Marcus was only 4 when his mother went missing, and he is 9 right now. He'll be 10 in September. And he is a wonderful blend of his mom and dad. Looks just like both of them.
He does. You can look at pictures and you see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, and that's, who I think of the most in this case is her son, and like we said earlier, you can get on YouTube and literally type in Larissa Sam and videos will pop up, and a lot of them are her with her son singing and her practicing for American Idol or just her random times hanging out with him, but you can see the love in her eyes and in his eyes, and it's definitely heartbreaking knowing that, you know, he was only 4. He didn't get very much time to build these memories, and kids are so impressionable and memories change. And so at this point, he's left with those videos if he wants to hear
Yes,
his mom or have
it's
memories. And
very
that's,
heartbreaking because I know a few years after it happened is kind of when he started questioning more because he was getting older, and he just started crying one day because he said he can't even remember if he told his mom goodbye or that he loved her that night.
gosh, I can't. Oh, that gives me goosebumps. And he's 4. I mean, bless his heart. I mean, that's never anything that a child should have to ever go through. And so I empathize so much. So he's back and forth. And so he's between you and his father. And like you said, he was made a suspect. I mean, in many cases where women come up missing, or if they're, are a victim of a crime, the first person that is looked at is the male spouse or counterpart.
Right.
And that's just, they've got to vet everything out. But he was officially and completely cleared by IPD, correct?
Yes.
So there is no concern. So just for clarification's sakes, because you will see, there's many groups on Facebook. If you type her name in on Facebook, certain things will come up, threads, where you'll see comments of, ideas and things like that of who it is. But, the interesting common denominator, I think, is that everybody, I mean, there'll be people that flat out post, well, the uncle did it and he killed himself. I mean, that seems to be, the general consensus. But like I said, we innocent until proven guilty. We unfortunately can't speak with
Exactly.
Rusty. But the goal with this podcast is that, what happened to Larissa wasn't at her own accord. So there are people involved. So people know. And 9 times out of 10, it's not just one person. They've told somebody there's, they need help. Somebody's aware of what's gone on. So our goal is to hopefully have those people hear this story. We ask that everybody shares it far and wide, but that's, what we hope to do with this case. So kind of just going back to, we're at the point where it's been a few days. So Rusty is in this car accident that should have been, a completely fatal moment for him. He comes out with a shoulder injury. What happens with Rusty after that?
He stayed in the hospital in Michigan. I can't remember how long he was in the hospital for. I do know that his car was totaled out and put in like an impound in Michigan, and the FBI was able to go there and search that car. They did not find anything again. So, his car was clean. They said there was few trace amounts of blood, but what did not match Larissa's.
That's interesting. So, and not that I'm implying anything here. I mean, but we had kind of discussed that his alibi was his son went with him. But it was confirmed that he wasn't. So this is 3 days after she goes up missing. So you've got Larissa was at his house. This, she's there. She comes up missing. The police are never there. So that 3 days before he leaves, nobody's been in his home to check anything. And then it's confirmed that his son was not in the car. So that leaves him back possibly here in Indiana, possibly wherever. But at this point, we don't also know where Larissa is. So,
Right.
I mean, what are your feelings on that? Do you have any gut feelings on maybe him having involvement, or what do you feel there?
I know from talking to the FBI, they say they feel if a body was taken from a home, they feel like it would have been a 2-person job. Um, However, like I say, only God and Larissa knows what happened. So,
Absolutely. And we're not trying to call anyone guilty by any means. I mean, we would certainly love to hear from Chad if he would ever like to contact us, and we'd love to hear his side of the story. And being that he is Rusty's son, Rusty's not here to defend himself either, just like Larissa's not here to defend anything that's ever been said about her. So it does take others to speak up on their behalf, but just because a possible suspect is no longer on earth doesn't mean that, there's still not a major crime committed, that the family deserves justice. And at this point, the justice that you can get is knowing where she's at. Because I want to remind listeners, we are going on 5 years now. So you're listening to this episode. It was 5 years ago to this day that Larissa went missing. So she has never been found. There is no indication of where she is. There's been so many times over the years when something happens on the West Side, or they'll say they found somebody, but we don't have any information. And it'll cross my mind and I'll go, oh my gosh, I hope it's not Larissa. But then in the back of my mind, I'll think, because it keeps that hope out there. If
It is,
you,
and it's heartbreaking. I know I've worked with the FBI over the years, and I still keep in contact. I know anytime they found a piece of jewelry near a body of water, or if they found, something, they would contact me and send me pictures, and it just makes your heart sink every time you're sent one of those. But I have always confirmed nothing I've seen has looked like it belonged to her.
right. And so also I want to note, Larissa has and we have pictures on our Crimelight page on Facebook. We will certainly include links to the Charlie Project. It's a great link that includes various pictures because Larissa had some extremely distinct and amazing artwork as far as her tattoos go.
Yes.
One of them being specifically, it's a cupcake. But when the FBI gets, and it's cute, but when the FBI gets involved, one thing that they do, and they do have the means to do this, and the technology through the FBI is astounding. I mean, what the satellite capabilities on where they can pinpoint, but just having programs that can run recognition. So a lot of times when girls are trafficked, they are put on the internet in some form or fashion. To be sold, essentially. I mean, everybody's familiar with what happened with Backpage years ago, and thankfully that website was taken down. But because of that, they have found new ways and new websites. And sadly enough, on major porn websites, that is a big trafficking market. Not all these women that you're watching video of are willing, participants in these videos. And there's been many of girls that have been found due to recognition of tattoos, features, in being able to run these scans on numerous videos on websites at once. But nothing has ever came back in any form on Larissa being out there. There's been many rumors, but there's just been, it's like a dead end trail. When she went missing, it's just kind of, that's where the trail almost ends, because there's been so many rumors, like I said, but nothing has actually came up. So you were talking about earlier different theories. And so other than the sex trafficking, is there anything else that's been discussed or that you've had people come to you with tips or rumors, so to speak? But is there anything else that the police have looked at?
Yes, I have heard other rumors. I've heard, possibly she was involved in a bad drug deal. I've heard that she was involved with a man who had a girlfriend that she didn't know about, and that they have, gotten together, and the boyfriend and girlfriend have, gotten rid of her together. We have heard she's been buried in places. FBI has searched many things. I know the sex trafficking was an issue. Then, both of the suspects were brought about in the beginning. And then there's also been, we've been asked if we thought she left on her own accord, which I know in my heart she did not.
Yeah, I would never, that's never even been a thought. And I think and because Larissa was so public, when I found out about the story, it was very easy to research this case on my own. Sorry about that little ding here. I forgot to hit the thing on my phone. And so the thing that's most interesting is that she had so much out there that was public. So you were able to go to her Facebook page and kind of see the day in the life of Larissa. You were able to really get into this case and just kind of see who she was. But one thing, dancer or not, and in many of our cases, I think if you haven't listened to a Crimelight episode so far, if you went back to every one of our cases, we like to shine the light on those who are not getting it, whether it be because of their sexual orientation, whether it be because of their chosen profession, whether it be because addiction had came in and ravaged their life. But you see it so often to where they just don't get the coverage that they deserve. But this girl was an average girl. She was working in a gentleman's club. She was, taking care of her child on her own. And that is in the state of Indiana, you clock in at $2.13 an hour and you claim, your tips.
Yes.
It is a legal job. It is a legal profession.
And she did it to support her child.
Absolutely. And she wasn't asking anybody else to do that. So I, have no judgments there whatsoever, but I feel like when people find that out about a person, it just kind of makes them think, it's not as big deal. I mean, that's literally what brought me into Larissa's case, was doing the exact same advocacy work for Angie Barlow, because her case got the, exact same snub to it, simply because, she was a dancer and went to this private party. It must have been her fault. So going back to that and those theories, I kind of want to remind the listeners, her car was backed into that driveway with a flat tire. Now, whether that flat tire was acquired on the way there, whether that flat tire, I've even came across the idea that maybe somebody knew she was at Rusty's, because she did put it on Facebook, and
Right.
flattened her, put a small puncture in her tire while she was inside. When she left, it would have slowly leaked out, and then you could target somebody. I mean, and that is always a possibility. I mean, I will always
Yes,
play
because I know they've
devil.
even brought up that they thought maybe she could have had a stalker since she was a dancer.
Right. And that is always, and I do want to say, I mean, I like to be very fair when I look at any situation in life. I like to look at, I like to debate myself on it. And so, as much as I genuinely do feel that Rusty Wagner does hold the answers to where Larissa is, I do know that I can equally say it could be very probable that she was stalked. But what is interesting is the location where her car was dumped. It was miles from his home. It would have been an easy walk. It wouldn't have been a long walk, but it wouldn't have been hard. I mean, to get back home had it been Rusty. But her car was backed in, and then the money was left. So as far as it being a drug deal gone bad, that pretty much takes that off the table for me, simply because they're going to take your money.
Yes.
Sex trafficking. If somebody targeted her to sell her, just the contents that were left in that car, I don't think any of that would have been there, because whoever did this had some time to prep and wear gloves, because nothing was found in that car, fingerprint wise or DNA wise, other than Larissa's. So,
Exactly. So it
and
makes
I
me feel
mean,
like it was planned.
it was planned. Oh, it's definitely, that's my thing, is that whoever did this, it was planned. But it also, and I'm gonna say here, and this is me, just my personal speculation. I'm not saying that this is true in any way, but when Larissa made that text that evening, we'll go back to that. I'm sorry, that Facebook post asking for a texting buddy. I, have flat out asked IMPD, do you think that was Larissa? They can't say whether or not it was. They said, well, we've definitely looked at it that it might not have been. I mean, that could have very well have been someone else. I mean, and we know where she was, so that leaves one person making that status. But the same person knew her every move. I mean, literally was infatuated with this girl. I mean, anything she posted on Facebook, he almost reacted to or commented on. I mean, he would jump on posts, well, make sure you come see your Uncle Rusty. And I mean, just constantly. So he knew her mannerisms on social media. So
Yes, and also something else that is odd, you mentioning that, and she did only, put that up there when Marcus was at school or anything, and never that late at night, because she would always go home, and she was going to be going home that night. It's just she never made it. But
right.
yeah, but go ahead.
No, you're fine. And just being, I mean, and then also keep in mind, I mean, it takes it off the table that she left on her own accord, because when I was talking about those videos earlier and her being so public, the one thing you can see is that she loved that boy. I mean, without a doubt, she loved her son. And I cannot ever see this girl. I mean, and I didn't know her personally. I can't speak to say, well, she would never do that. But I'm saying from what I've taken in, and I get we can all put on social media what we want people to see. But when you look into these videos, I mean, that's genuine. I mean, that the love that you can see between her son and her. I mean, I can't see her especially choosing to leave on Father's Day weekend. When there's already a separation with the dad, there's already tension there. I can't see her just up and leaving and having Marcus constantly remember that my mom chose to leave on Father's Day. You know what I mean? That would be
Right.
traumatizing. I don't think that, so that takes, I just feel like, so many things and theories are just kind of taken off the table. But Jasmine, I know we've been rambling, and I know you've been digging into the case pretty hard the past few days. So I just kind of wanted to see what, now that we're talking about all this, what were your initial thoughts when you were looking into everything?
So I obviously got out, did my digging, and there's no secret. There's the whole World Wide Web out there where people get into looking into these missing person cases and digging into them, web sleuths being one of the more notorious ones. So I had seen some interesting stuff, and you know how people talk, and sometimes, unfortunately, the talking is how we get some of our best clues in some of these cases, especially these cold ones like this. So there was a report supposedly made by a news source, and I have not been able to confirm that. So I just wanted to check with you and see. So there had been a report that there had been sightings of her 3 days later at a gas station in a Prius. Were you guys ever made aware of any of that, or was that ever confirmed or denied?
Yes. Now that we have found out later that was Rusty's son that actually called that in. So that would have been Chad Wagner that called in citing her.
Very interesting, especially given that his alibi doesn't add up, especially, as we had touched on previously, or you had touched on previously. Another thing I'm interested in is the flat tire on the vehicle. So was there ever any investigation looking into that tire? Had she picked up a nail? Or did it look more like somebody had maybe tampered with it? Because my thoughts maybe went to, what if, God forbid, this was kind of a setup more or less, and somebody had tampered with that tire in one way or another in hopes of getting her to pull over, and kind of following her. That's just kind of where our mind goes with these things. So did they ever say, based upon investigation on the tire, was it like she had picked up a nail, or had somebody tampered with it?
They had never said. Now, I know she did have a slow leak in that tire, but it wouldn't have gone that quickly.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, so I thought that was very interesting. And so Chad was the one who, going back to that previous question, Chad was the one that had called that sighting in. Did detectives ever reach out, and kind of go over that with him, why he would make this claim? Or, obviously considering that, obviously his dad drove a Prius, that's just crazy, insane, odd to me. So what was the outcome of the follow-up on that? Was there ever any conversation about that?
I do not know if they actually talked to Chad. I actually turned in other information to the FBI about Chad also in 2016. So the year after Larissa went missing, I took a job working over on the west side doing home care. And he just so happened to be working the grounds in the apartment complex I was working at that day. And I flagged him down over and I said, "Hey, aren't you Rusty's son?" And he says, "Yes, my name's Chad." And he just looked me directly in the eye and he said, "Your niece is dead."
Wow.
Oh
Now,
my
for
gosh.
somebody to look you straight in the eye and say that is very odd to me. But also, he told me he found out she was dead and that he knew of some people that paid to see a dead body in a basement in his neighborhood, and it was her. And I did turn this information into the FBI.
Oh, wow. So see, sometimes there's, and we do pre-interview with our guests, but we try to keep these interviews as candid as possible. We do as much of our research on our own. We talk to, detectives when we can. But this is definitely something that is coming out and unfolding for us right on the air. So wow. So, I mean, I can't imagine, you're in the middle of your work day, and I can't imagine, your heart's dropping, your stomach's falling, in knots.
Yes.
And he was just said this with a calm demeanor, or did he have, just like matter of factly just says it?
Yes.
Wow.
Just
And
very
no
calm.
follow-up with you guys from the FBI or investigators, detectives, when you reported that information? Nothing ever came of that?
They said that they spoke with him, and the address that he gave them, there was nothing
Well, of
there.
course, nobody's going to, keep something, unfortunately keep a body that long in a basement to be tipped off. And this is just me thinking about out loud. And again, Lauren touched on it. Everybody, innocent until proven guilty. There are persons of interest, clearly Rusty being one of them. And before I go there, let me ask this. What was Larissa's relationship with Chad?
That was Rusty's son, and then he had a daughter. I can't remember her name, but she was trying to, be friends with them because that was part of her family. And like I said, the night that she went missing, she had contacted Chad because he and his dad were fighting and was trying to get them to make up.
Right. And that's, so this is where my mind goes, and not to be too speculative, because we try not to do things like that. Excuse me. But,
Right.
a lot of times, and I have experience with this in my own life, I have several siblings that I did not grow up with. So when you meet somebody and you're trying to make that bond, I have experience on that end of trying to grow a bond with somebody as an adult or an older, as you've aged. And thankfully I was able to, in my life, do that with my siblings, excuse me, that I did not get a chance to grow up with. But, all too often, and there's been psychological researches on things like these, when people don't grow up with that family connection, and it's something that's discovered later, sometimes it's very hard for somebody to see someone as family, and so my mind instantly wonders, how did Chad view his relationship with Larissa, and if he and Rusty were fighting and he came forward and told you this information, it just leads me kind of down a rabbit hole. We'll call it that way. It does lead me down a rabbit hole to
Right.
wonder, maybe there was a little bit more involvement. Maybe there wasn't. And again, like Lauren said, we would love to hear from Chad. We would love to speak to Chad and let Chad clear the air on a lot of this, because again, he deserves a chance to be heard as well. Because ultimately, any
Yes.
information we can get to help you guys find Larissa is certainly, the goal with this, and to bring awareness. But I just find that's something that strikes me very odd with this case, that, Chad and his father were fighting the night that, she ended up missing and disappearing. And, what you've just shared with us on air, there's a lot of things. I think it's led to more questions that I think Chad needs to be answering for people.
Yeah. Well, I guess
I agree.
one that pops into my head, I guess, Deborah, is that, so she was contacting him. Do we know, or have they checked his whereabouts that night? Do we know if Chad came to the house as well?
I don't know.
Because that's my wonder, is maybe, she was trying to mend this relationship, and, we don't know what, they were fighting about. And we don't know if maybe, as being his actual biological child, and then coming in, and this girl's coming in, creating this relationship with her. I don't know if there was some jealousy, or if he was maybe resentful to the fact that she's trying to fix whatever they have going on. And it's really,
Right.
in his eyes, maybe it has nothing to do with her. But I'm just wondering if maybe, did he come over that night? Because then the big question that we see on Crimelight on the post for Larissa is, well, why would he have a reason to do something to his niece? And
Exactly.
I will give my thoughts and theories on that. And then I'd kind of like for you to counter that and just tell me, because I'm sure that's a major question that's gone through your head numerous times. But I mean, for a man to have a previous devious sex acts and rape charge, and then, and that's just what he's been convicted of. People like that prey on women in that form and are able to be capable of that behavior. I mean, it's not to say that it's a rape is horrible, but I mean, that devious sex acts charge that's on it, there's something else going on with that. So, I mean, that's exacerbated for sure. So it just makes me wonder. I mean, he had this infatuation with Larissa, granted, she did reach out to him and create this contact, but I mean, I don't know. I'm wondering, were they sitting there? She's playing guitar. They're having moonshine. Did he maybe make a comment that made her uncomfortable? Did he maybe do something that made her uncomfortable? And, anger came out, or retaliation, and, she was injured, and it wasn't maybe the intent. But,
Right.
At this point, I don't want her to tell on me, because I've already been convicted of rape and a devious sex act. So I'm certainly going to go down for this. So it leaves me to wonder what could have possibly happened. But then with hearing, that he was arguing with Chad, then it makes me wonder, okay, well, did Chad come over and, something happened that maybe she witnessed that she wasn't supposed to see that night in that house? I don't know. But what has been your thought process on that?
I still have so many questions unanswered. And like I said, there's so many speculations and different sides of it. And I feel like we don't have Chad's full side of the story. And of course, I don't feel we're never going to have Rusty's full side, since he actually ended up committing suicide a couple years ago, and he hung himself.
And so going to that is, I mean, we have been talking about he's no longer with us, and we talked about the attempt, but I guess we did kind of skip over the fact that he was successful. And that is, another reason why the FBI looked back on the accident and thought, gee, maybe this wasn't an accident. This is looking more like a first suicide attempt, especially being it was 3 days after she went missing. He's going to help his wife move. And I mean, it's all very strange, but when he hung himself, was that in his own home? Do you know who found him, or was there a note?
Yes.
Was there any a note or any information that he left to say why he did this, or was there any final words?
He had been questioned by the FBI for the second time, and they feel like he possibly thought they were closing in on him, is what they feel, because it was 2 days after he was questioned for the second time that he hung himself in his home, and he was found by his oldest daughter.
Which is so traumatic and traumatizing for her. And so my heart goes out. And again, I know that people are going to hear this podcast and have various opinions and thoughts. And I don't discredit the fact that this was someone's father. There's going to be mixed emotions on this. And this podcast is definitely not meant to, create a whole podcast saying Rusty Wagner is guilty and this is what it is. It's not for that purpose. But we can't ignore what happened and the facts that we have and where those facts lead back to. And it's not just our speculation. I mean, a lot of this speculation is because that is where the FBI and detectives are with this. So we're just trying to put as much information out there as possible, because that is what solves cases. Even the tiniest detail. I mean, there's been information that's been released in this podcast that you're not going to find anywhere else. That's for sure. I mean, if you look into Larissa, you'll find a lot of news stories. You can see candlelight vigils that were done for her. But the thing that I was talking about with Deborah before we got on the air was that I just felt that it was important to get this information out, because it does always pop up, the sex trafficking. And like I said, I don't want to take that hope completely off the table because we don't know, but I feel like we do need to get information out there that is stronger in another direction that law enforcement actually is looking at. So because of that, there are people that have to know, and we hope that they reach out. So I know we have been on the phone for quite some time, but one thing that I do want to give you the chance to do, because there really hasn't been this platform for Larissa ever to have her story out, is if you, as her aunt, someone who has helped raise her, someone who has helped raise her son and pick up the pieces of this tragedy, and we still don't know where Larissa is. So I kind of want to have a two-part question for you. So first I want to ask you is if you could make a statement to anybody who knows where Larissa is right now, what happened, what would be your heartfelt plea to these people?
I would just pray that if anybody saw anything that night, if anybody has heard any stories, whether it be rumors or true, just to please bring it forward, because it's going to be one person with a pair of loose lips that just, crack the case completely open. We have to be the voices for the missing and the murdered, because they no longer have a voice.
Absolutely. I can't agree with you more. And that's exactly why we created Crimelight podcast. I mean, our slogan and our motto, I guess, so to speak, is shining a light for, missing persons and unsolved murders, because like you just said, they've had their voice taken from them, and they need people to stand up and fight and share their name, say their name, put their story out there, because they can't defend themselves. So I can't thank you enough for all of the information and everything that you were able to provide for us. And we are going to certainly include links to contact, the FBI, to contact IMPD, to be able to contact the different Facebook pages that have been set up for Larissa. Being that we're wrapping this up and we do want to, still keep hope alive. We're not, we don't know what happened to Larissa, but we want to know. We want to bring her home. That is the whole goal. But for that chance that Larissa is out there and, possibly could hear this, or in some way this gets to her, if you could say something to Larissa, what would you say to her?
I would just tell her that we love her and we miss her, and to please think of Marcus and think of what this is doing to him. And if you are possibly out there trying to make it home, just keep trying, because we got the light on waiting for you.
Exactly. So I appreciate you speaking with us again. I know this is the biggest probably tragedy that you've ever experienced in your life and traumatic situation. And it is hard to talk about, but you've been so strong, and getting that information out, like we said, is so imperative to solving these cases. And it was important to us, being that, it is, I don't want to say the 5-year anniversary, because the anniversary is typically a celebration. But what we would like to celebrate as soon as possible is bringing Larissa home.
Yes.
Her family deserves that. Her son, if she is no longer with us, I think a lot of people have came to terms with that. You and I have talked, Deborah, and you've said, deep down, you would love to think she's out there, but, with everything that's been investigated and where it's all led, and the tragedies that have happened afterwards, with him committing suicide 2 days after the FBI come back. I just feel like if you look at it, with an unbiased opinion, and you're just looking at the facts, I feel like it definitely lays out what's more than likely happened here. And so for that, I am so extremely sorry. And that's something that I can't imagine, because you have this feeling, but you just don't know. And I just, it's that in-between time. Like I said, we were very close with Angie Barlow's family, and Christina said, that day that they found Angie, that killed all hope.
Yes.
They had 8 months that they were looking for, but those 8 months were so brutal, because you just don't know where your child is, and you never think you're going to end up at a point where you have no answers. And then,
And you're never ready for it.
exactly. So, either way that this falls, if she is out there, if she's not, somebody knows. And we just beg you that you would have compassion in your heart to place yourself, in the shoes of this family, and call something in anonymously. There's not going to be a conviction at this point, more than likely. And I don't think that the family's so much even worried about that. I think that, at this point, they would be just fine with an anonymous phone call, letting them know where to find Larissa and to bring her home. So again, so Deborah, we want to thank you. And I do want to give you a minute. Do you have any final thoughts or words or anything you'd like to say before we close things up here?
I just pray that, we can bring her home one of these days and give us all closure.
Absolutely. So we are going to end the call here in just a moment, but stay on the line with us. We're just going to stop the recording. And again, we can't thank you enough. So we'll stop the call, and then we will continue talking with you in just 1 second there, Deborah.
Okay.
That was certainly a shocking conversation to have. We thought we were going to go into that with getting a lot of confirmation, which we did, but we had no idea of the information that we'd find out. So that was all a raw call. We talked to her, previously for sure, but that was a very genuine conversation, and I can't thank Deborah enough for participating. So I think you all can hear, just from beginning to end, why this is a case that has intrigued me so much and is important to me in finding answers, because there's a little boy that wants to know where his mom is and deserves to have those answers and that closure, whatever that may be. So if you are listening to this story and you do hold information that would be important to the case, it could be a rumor, it could be hearsay, please call 317-327-6539, and that'll take you to the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. You may also call 317-327-TIPS and make an anonymous tip. But at this point, anything is going to help, and nothing is too small. So again, we can't thank Deborah enough for her participation. Our heart goes out to the whole family. I've spoke to her mom before, Rebecca, and she's been very helpful with answers. And we just want to help this family get that information in that is going to bring that closure to them. So as we wrap up the episode, we do want to give our credits. So we would like to thank Mizzlemac Productions for our music. We will certainly be looking forward to interacting with you all on the Crimelight discussion group page. We have that up, and you can access that through your search bar. We have links on our actual page as well. And just sharing these stories and getting these podcasts out is what's so important. So we thank you for all the shares that you've given us, and we hope that you share this episode just as much. So as we head out, we definitely want to say Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, mine included. And we would love for you to share this episode, go back and check out old episodes. And until next time, we will be working on a bonus episode, but we will be back in 2 weeks with that. So we wish you all well and take care.